Laurence Edmondson for ESPN, joined by our very own Nate Saunders in Australia. And we're talking to you about 3 or 4 hours after the first race of the 2026 season. There was a huge amount of chat, a huge amount of criticism about this new era of Formula One going into this race. But there's also a saying in motorsport, Nate, that when the flag drops, the BS stops. So what was the feeling in the paddock and what did you make of the race?
Well, I'm feeling a little bit smug because I remember telling people in the Bahrain test when all the doom and gloom started, I kind of said it flippantly, but there was some truth to it. I said, if a Ferrari leads into turn one in Bahrain and there's a genuine fight on for the lead or for the victory, we'll quickly forget kind of all of the nonsense around it. Now, obviously, speaking then, I didn't realize that we were going to spend most of Saturday in Melbourne, talking extensively about the cars and the regulations, and the negativity would continue. But that was really the case, wasn't it? We had a Ferrari lead. Those starts look unbelievable, and I think that's going to be a feature all season, which, if you're looking for reasons to be excited about that season, that is one of them. When a team that doesn't qualify the best has that lightning start off the line, it's going to be a factor at most races. So I really enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed those first 12, 13 laps. I think then the race kind of, it settled into something that was a lot different. I think that a lot of that is down to not just the regulations, but the fact that this has actually spread the field out quite significantly, which I don't think is a problem with the regs in the sense of the 50-50 split. That does just seem to be the fact that this is a very difficult set of regulations to get right. So I enjoyed the race in terms of you didn't know who was going to win at the beginning. I think it's settled into much more one-sided one. But I mean, I don't remember a time when the lead has been fought over like that at the start of a race for a long time. Certainly, the championship last season went to the wire, didn't it? But we didn't really have that many races where there was that much action. So if you're asking me just how did I enjoy it, I really enjoyed the beginning. I think there's a lot of problems with this formula that we can get into. And, I don't think we should just, on the back of one race, condemn the regulations or completely say they're the best thing ever. But that was enjoyable. And I think credit where it's due. That was thrilling stuff. And we very nearly got Lewis Hamilton in there as well. I think everyone was like urging him on, weren't they, to kind of get involved. But I mean, I was watching it from the media center, Laurence. I mean, what did you think? Your vantage point's very different. We've both done this before where one of us is at the race, the other one's sitting watching it at home. How different was it for you watching it with the commentary and maybe, just kind of you're in a different setting? Like, did you get the same vibe?
Well, I have to admit, I was very skeptical going into the race, especially when George Russell put it on pole position by 0.8 of a second. And I felt not only were these regulations perhaps a misstep for Formula One, but also that we'd have Mercedes dominance. Now, very happy to be proven wrong on both of those, again, from that small sample of one race at one circuit. But the stat that stood out to me, and I think, the moment that stood out for me in the race was 7 overtakes for the lead in the first 9 laps, as George Russell, who started the race with apparently 0 energy in his battery pack, was overtaken by Leclerc, as you said, into the first corner. And then the two of them just traded position throughout that race. Now, a lot of those overtakes were down to this new energy management formula. It was down to how you use that boost, how you use that energy against your rival to either take them by surprise or defend, or perhaps try and, save energy for later in the lap to attack again. And so all of that together, I actually think worked remarkably well. But the one thing, we really should say, and you alluded to it, and so have I already in this answer, is that this is one circuit. This is Albert Park in Australia, which actually historically has not been a great circuit for racing. And I think that certainly the start of this race was way better than what we'd usually come to expect from Australia. But it's also a circuit that is probably the most energy limited, if I can use that phrase, on the calendar. It's certainly in the top 4 energy limited circuits. So that means that there's very few opportunities to charge a battery under the normal situation of just braking. And there's a huge amount of full throttle opportunities to just use that battery power up. So, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you're struggling to put the energy back into the battery, but you're freely just using it all around the track, you're very quickly going to come into a situation where you've run out of energy. And that's why I think there was such negative criticism of qualifying, which we shouldn't, disregard, as you say, just because we had an exciting few laps in the race. The qualifying, I think, is an issue. To see cars running out of battery midway down the straight, the revs dropping, making it look like an out lap rather than a full attack qualifying lap, is not a good look for the sport. But I found that interesting, Nick, because you talked to all the drivers after that qualifying session, and it was almost entirely negative, apart from George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, who were very happy to be on the front row of the grid for Mercedes. But then after the race, a few of those opinions seemed to change a little bit, did they? Or were drivers still being cautious?
I think, yeah, I mean, you have to caveat it a little bit, because every single driver that wasn't in that top 3 press conference after Saturday or after Sunday were fairly negative. And I think that sometimes is indicative of the fact that they're not fighting for the win. They're not fighting out in the front with a car that can be championship contender. I mean, Charles Leclerc, Kimi Antonelli, and George Russell, when they spoke after the race, they had those kind of early laps to talk about. Kimi Antonelli had the thrill of being on the podium. I think it's much easier when you're talking in a positive setting anyway to be very positive about the regs. I don't think opinions have changed that much. I mean, I asked Max Verstappen myself, I said, is there anything that you enjoyed actually racing? We know he's a racing driver, this red-blooded racing driver that just loves to race anything. And he said no, and he said, look, it's not. And he actually made the point. I knew it was the case, but he hasn't said it so explicitly. He said, look, I'm not just saying this to hate on Formula One. I love Formula One. I just don't like this formula. I think we could be doing better. And I'm really conflicted, if I'm honest with you, about where I stand, because so many of these drivers know what they want from racing. And it's very easy to just say, well, he's got sour grapes, that guy. Max has got sour grapes. Esteban Ocon was talking about racing, and he was saying that it's completely artificial. You've got, one guy passes you, you then have a boost, you just get back past him. Bortoletto said he overtook someone by mistake and he was annoyed with himself because it just meant the other guy got past him straight away again. So I do think that while those laps were entertaining at the front, it still is an overwhelming consensus that do not like these regulations, both in terms of racing and both in terms of racing and in terms of qualifying. And I think that in a sport like Formula One, you do have to listen to what the drivers are saying, and you kind of have to park some of the cynicism at the door. I mean, Lando Norris really does not like these regs. I mean, we knew after qualifying, he said they'd gone from the best cars ever to the worst cars ever. And he's really doubled down after the race. He said that the changing of speeds, that chaos we saw early on, is dangerous. He said we're going to see somebody going over a fence, and I think I am actually quite skeptical about how long Formula One can keep that start procedure going. As thrilling as it is to see Ferrari that fast, there's clearly a massive discrepancy, and this is just one little example that leaves me feeling a little bit unsure of what I think. There's a massive discrepancy between the speeds there. Now, this is where it gets complicated, because if you're Ferrari or one of the teams that has a great launch, you're going to say, well, that's we've just done a better job. The problem you've got is there is such differences between these power units at the moment. I'm not sure how safe some of this is, and I think that's what Lando Norris was alluding to. And you say something like that, and you don't want to sound negative from this side of it, but I'm very, very aware, and I'm sorry if I'm going around the same point here, but my fear is that those laps, while they were thrilling and they were fantastic to watch, and I don't actually know, Laurence, and you might be able to correct me on this, I can't remember a time I've seen Charles Leclerc and George Russell fighting wheel to wheel. I'm sure they have at some point, but that also felt new to me. It felt, we've seen these two young guys win a lot of races, get a lot of pole positions, but it seemed like the first time these two guys had been put together to win, which I think also helped the entertainment factor of it. But I do think if you take that away, the fact that it was for the win, if that had been for third and fourth, I don't think the TV maybe focuses on it as much. I don't think it feels maybe as special. And coming through that pen, a lot of the drivers were still saying, I didn't really feel anything from there. Gasly was saying, it doesn't feel like racing in the way that he's learned to race since he was a kid. So I think you have to listen to those things, and Formula One has to listen to them. And I think the big thing that's going to come out of this is, for a long, long time in these, especially in this like kind of last 2 months, Formula One, I think, has taken the wrong approach to it, where they've said, drivers, you shouldn't criticize the regulations. You should keep your mouth shut and just be positive. Being positive doesn't really achieve anything at this point. I think that these, and I don't want to go too far into it without throwing back to you, Laz, but I do think that these regulations are fundamentally flawed, in the sense of that the qualifying does seem, I don't know how they're going to fix that. And it seems to come down to that 50-50 combustion. So we're going to get races where we have incredible overtakes. I think Charles Leclerc used the phrase yo-yo, you're yo-yoing back and forth. And Albert Park seems to be a really good example of where that is good. There's not big straights. I think if there'd been longer straights at Albert Park, Russell probably would have just been a scamper clear of Charles Leclerc, and then we wouldn't have had that fight to talk about. So to answer your question, the drivers still don't seem thrilled by it. I think there is also an element here of drivers are slowly going to learn how to use energy management better during a race. But even if that is the case, and this is where I go back to the thing that Max Verstappen said all those weeks ago in preseason testing, I don't think in Formula One we should be spending as much time as even me and you have just now talking about energy management and energy recovery. I know it gives drivers different tactics to use, but that to me is the real shame of this. I think we've turned Formula One into this thing where, you know, there's so much that underneath the chassis and underneath, you know, within the engine and within the battery that's now being talked about. And you do get a sense from these drivers early on that they feel like their role within the car is diminished. Now, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, incredible fight. And I'm sure they feel very proud about that. I mean, it might well be the best win, you know, of Russell's career, just based on the fact that he had to earn it like that. But yeah, the mood hasn't changed massively. I mean, Lewis Hamilton did say to us he likes the regs, but then again, look at that from his perspective. He was, you know, within a car length of his teammate at the finish line. We haven't seen that for a long, long time. So it's really difficult to gauge, you know, which drivers to listen to and which drivers to kind of discount. And it's a weird hodgepodge for me to say, but you almost have to take them all on board and say, we've only got one sample. The race itself, you know, did peter out a bit. It depends what you like from a race as well, Laurence. I know we've sat together and watched races, and, you know, sometimes something can be thrilling to one person and maybe not so thrilling to another. But I think the driver feedback will change. I mean, did any quotes stand out to you post race that you heard that either surprised you or that represented a U-turn? Because we heard so many post race as well. I'm not sure if I'm kind of discounting a major driver that's changed their mind, you know, overnight.
Yeah, perhaps not change their mind. I mean, I think there was positivity from the top three, which is perhaps what you might expect. Lewis as well, I think, was very positive about the racing, but perhaps his criticism hasn't been quite as extreme on the new formula as others. He does have an issue with the power unit side of it, but he's often caveated that by saying, but, you know, the new car is, you know, the car and the lightness and the smaller dimensions are a good thing, and the having less downforce. I think the wider thing Formula One faces now is that really there's not many changes they can make. They can tweak it a little bit, but fundamentally you've got, certainly this year, set a battery that is a certain capacity, 4 megajoules of usable energy, a fuel limit which is set and presumably defined now by the size of the fuel tanks in these cars without having to completely redesign them. So where your energy is coming from is fundamentally limited going forward. You can't just all of a sudden have more, which is essentially what this formula needs to go along with what the drivers want. What we will see throughout this season and then into following seasons, absolutely, is evolution of this technology and improvements in it, which will limit the concerns that some of the drivers have started to talk about, and perhaps actually take away some of the randomness in racing, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It is inevitable as the teams improve. But yeah, the fundamental regulations, how they're set, this essentially, like you keep referencing, the 50% of the power coming from the V6 turbo engine and 50% from the battery is set, and you can't really do a huge amount to it. You can tweak it a little bit, you can put it a little bit more back towards the power unit, but that will only be by limiting the output of the battery, of the ability of the MG UK, which ultimately will make these cars slower as well. So it's a bit of a tough spot that F1 finds itself in terms of how do you change it if you think that changes do need to be made. But look, like you say, we have spent a lot of time talking about this already. We should mention that we have a Grand Prix result after waiting over the winter. We have a winner in George Russell, and we have what looks like a new, I don't want to say dominant, because today's performance wasn't entirely dominant, but certainly the clear new favourites into this title and this new regulations, and that is Mercedes. And within that, you got to say George Russell, right? How impressed were you by his performance today?
Yeah, honestly, I was super impressed. I mean, I think we've figured for a long time, haven't we, that George Russell was going to be the guy coming into this regulation set. I know, I've got to say as well, I mean, we've talked about it, world-class sandbagging job by Mercedes. I mean, really, really, you know, top-notch. We were talking about that for a long time. Russell, I was really impressed with. I think there was so much jeopardy within that fight with Ferrari, you know, and there were so many moments. I don't know if we were watching that fight, and a few of us in the media center were saying, I'm not sure if I've ever seen Russell have to have this much wheel-to-wheel fighting. I'm sure he's had it, but it seemed like the first time he had to really go and do that in a race win, and over that many laps. And he clearly had the quicker car over a race distance. But there were a lot of times he could have got caught out there, and he was racing with this new formula with all this energy management that we won't get bogged down into talking about again. So I was really impressed with him, and I think he's been so calm and collected. He's not really overthought that tag of favorite. And he just seemed like a cool cucumber, the whole time. I mean, I think he needs to work on his post-race radio messages, if I'm honest with you. It wasn't the best one we've ever heard, but the thing with him is, he's going to have a lot of moments this season where he's celebrating a win. And I think, we've known for a while that George Russell, the moment he gets the race car to do it, is going to be a really, really strong favorite for the champion. And actually, and Laurence, maybe you agree with this as well, that we talk so much about Russell versus Verstappen being box office. But I think today proved that if it's Russell v Leclerc, that is a more than adequate replacement for it being Russell, because the two of those guys look absolutely in the form of their lives at the moment.
Well, here's the next question, or the next point, is how much did Ferrari throw away a chance of victory? Because Leclerc was leading before that first virtual safety car around lap 12, I think it was, and Mercedes took the opportunity to pit. Ferrari actually, they probably didn't know at the time, and this was maybe why they didn't do it the following lap, but they actually had two opportunities to go and pit there. And if they'd taken either of them, Leclerc would have maintained the lead, most likely, as long as the pit stop went well, and then been on the same strategy as Russell. So perhaps able to keep him behind, perhaps not, given the overall advantage of Mercedes. But do you think, how much was this a race lost by Ferrari, despite the fact that they were talking up, the gap to Mercedes was smaller than they thought? Was this an opportunity to get an early win on the board?
I think it was an opportunity to certainly put Mercedes under a lot more pressure. I think all told, I think Russell probably was untouchable over a race distance. But you made a great point, is that, we don't know that in the moment. And I think that the thing that Ferrari are going to have to do, if they're as close as they look to Mercedes, they look like they're within that kind of that margin of error. You have to be able to make strategy calls that put the other team, the stronger team, on the back foot. And it did seem strange they didn't split those strategies. Obviously, very easy to armchair quarterback it, but they had an opportunity to do that. They didn't do it. And Lewis was saying it during the race. And, there's obviously that narrative of Ferrari can't get the strategies right, etc. I actually think, that can be sometimes overblown when it's Ferrari, but I don't think they lost themselves the win here. But I think getting both of those Ferraris on the podium was doable today. I think if they'd put Kimi Antonelli under pressure late on, if they'd forced Antonelli to have to kind of race a little bit more, put some pressure on those tires, I'm not sure if Kimi didn't sound too confident about that one-stop strategy at one point. So, I think the reasoning that Fred gave was that they didn't anticipate the degradation, as you mentioned. It's easy to look at it in hindsight now, but I just hope the learning from that is when they look at it, they say, well, why not? Like, let's roll the dice a bit. The good thing they're going to have, we don't know exactly where Max would have shaken out there, but one thing they have to bear in mind is I don't think they're going to have a massive threat from behind, certainly not in the opening few races. McLaren and Red Bull do just seem to be a bit of a step back in terms of where they are. They should take advantage of that a lot more. They should say, look, if we roll the dice here, really we're playing with, instead of saying this pit stop could cost Lewis third down to seventh, you're really maybe not playing with that much margin of error. And Mercedes, they're going to be the team on the front foot a lot more. So, I don't want to sit there and play into that whole narrative of they cost themselves the win, but you just wish with Ferrari sometimes, go and take the initiative, go and, you've got two great drivers there that can do that. So I think it definitely was an opportunity lost to really try and swing the balance. But I mean, maybe I'm being too kind on Mercedes, but I think Russell just seemed to be out of touch. What do you reckon?
I think Mercedes had the faster race car and the faster qualifying car this weekend. And I think had they got into a straight fight, let's say Ferrari had just mirrored Mercedes' pit stop strategy or led that pit stop strategy by pitting under that VSC, I still think over the course of the race, Russell probably had the potential to get ahead. But like you say, whether they could have taken points off Antonelli, Ferrari, maybe. But the overall thing is, I think it is positive for Ferrari. The performance.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, if you say at the start of the year, sorry, dude.
I'd say that the race starts as well. Like, that's a huge ace to have up your sleeve going into the first few races. Again, we expect that Mercedes will get it right as they go. They certainly didn't get it right this weekend because they had two cars, both Antonelli and Russell, arrive on the grid with basically 0% battery, which is crazy. And they talking to people afterwards, they didn't seem to understand it, exactly why they didn't have that. But then, for Leclerc, who also said his battery wasn't in perfect position, but for Leclerc to take advantage of the lights going out incredibly quickly as well. I don't know if you noticed, but the 5 red lights went on and then they were off immediately, which, given everything we've heard about this start procedure being an issue for drivers, was, a bit of a curveball for a lot of the drivers on that grid. But again, didn't matter. Like, Ferrari still had that inherent advantage there that they took. So they need to capitalize on that early in the season, because I think that will wane as we go along, but they need to capitalize on it.
Yeah, on the lights thing, just quickly, I was watching it from the window of the media center, so you can't quite see the lights. I was right parallel to the lights. And I actually thought the 2 Mercedes drivers had made a false start because they rolled when I wasn't expecting the lights to go out. I was thinking, oh, there's another second or two here. So yeah, it was. And I don't know if that start procedure, they've obviously been working on it, but yeah, that side of things this season, the starts are going to be fascinating. And let's say, thank God that Ferrari have the better start procedure, because I think that will be something that brings Ferrari into a lot of races this year. I'm not sure whether, if Russell had just gone into turn 1 there ahead of the Ferraris and out of that gap where the overtake mode could kind of bring Charles straight back to him, I think he could have just disappeared up the road. So the starts Ferrari have could be like the godsend of the season, certainly early on. I mean, it's going to be interesting. Like, China, there's a shorter runoff, a shorter run down to turn 1. Suzuka's a lot narrower, so that could be interesting if they're starting a bit further back. But I think that's going to be a real point of difference certainly for a little bit, like you said.
Now, we don't have time to go through all the ups and downs of each team, but we do have time to pick a driver of the day. So, I mean, you may pick George Russell and Charles Leclerc, who we've talked about extensively. But Nate, who was your driver of the day from the Australian Grand Prix?
I'm going to give it to, well, I mean, this is probably classic British bias, I guess. That's what people call it. But you can't argue against this guy. Arvid Lindblad on his debut, 8th position. It could easily have been Russell. It could easily have been Leclerc. But I think to come into a new formula, to come into, possibly the most complicated set of cars we've seen in the modern era and drive like he did, I was super impressed. And I mean, I tweeted it. Arvid Lindblad can say to his grandkids in several decades' time, on his first lap of a Formula One race, he was 3rd and he was going wheel to wheel with Lewis Hamilton. It showed real guts to be out there fighting like that, and to have got his head around the rules. I've been talking to people at Racing Bulls, and they're really impressed with him. Just the way he's gone about learning the car, the way he races, the way he's kind of absorbing information. And I think that audition, for or that first appearance as a rookie, superb. And actually, we saw for a little bit Lindblad and Behrman fighting, and that was really nice because you see there a glimpse of what Formula One's future might be like in 5-10 years time. So I'll give it to Lindblad, but I think there's a case for a few drivers, right? But yeah, rookie doing that on his first race is always very impressive.
Yeah, I think that's a very good shout, and a result that was kind of highlighted even more by the struggles of Liam Lawson, who of course struggled to get away from the grid and very nearly had.
Colapinto, the hero of the start, because he could have been disastrous. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but yeah. But what about you? Who was your driver of the day, mate?
Well, Lindblad is a very good shout, but the other one I had in mind was Max Verstappen, going from 20th on the grid, a qualifying position that wasn't his fault. Clearly there was an issue on the Red Bull under braking on his qualifying lap in Q1, and therefore he was starting 20th, and he got it back to 6th place. So, I mean, no surprise that Max Verstappen is able to turn around a performance like that. But I think a good thing, considering, we're already talking about Mercedes versus Ferrari. Well, there was signs, from, although he was, I don't know, it's like 50 seconds off them at the finish. There were signs at least that Max has got a car that he can fight with. And I think, he'd probably fill that gap between the Ferraris and the McLarens if it had a normal race from a normal starting position. But he didn't like it. He doesn't like Formula One. He doesn't care if he's passing 14 cars, because he said that his performance advantage was so big over most of them that it didn't make a difference. But it doesn't stop me being impressed by a performance like that.
Yeah, I think we should just quickly, while we're talking driver of the day, I want to talk the nightmare of the day, if we can do it, just because it should be talked about. Oscar Piastri on the formation lap. Well, not even the formation lap, actually. Sorry, I'm putting him in the Isaac Hadjar role of last year. I was actually really excited to see what Piastri could do at his home race. He'd looked stronger than Norris all weekend. He had this steely determination in him all kind of week. And I mean, that was, I actually could hear that. So I was in the paddock coming back from an interview with James Vowles. We had a quick round table with him before the race, walking to where we go onto the grid. And there was this sudden, I've never heard the noise before, ever. It was like this kind of shocked exhalation of air. And we were looking around, and then somebody said, "Oh, Piastri's crashed." And you could hear people like almost, it was this weird noise, and the whole mood of the place just changed. And I really hope that doesn't derail Piastri's season, because I think he'd looked a lot stronger, than Norris through the weekend. And I just felt that McLaren, I don't know whether, he would have been anywhere near the podium, but just such a blow. And if you remember 12 months ago, he had that setback where he spun out, finished 9th, and then went on that amazing run of wins. I just hope he can rebuild himself in the same way. I don't think obviously wins are going to be there this year, but it was so difficult watching what he went through last season with that turnaround. Sorry, with the way that his season spiraled away from him. So yeah, that was bad. I just thought it was worth mentioning because home race, and a lot of the Aussies here, I think, are trying to work out how to end curses and whatnot, because that curse of the Australian drivers in Australia is pretty bad.
Well, I'm going to take you up on disaster of the day and add a disastrous weekend, or disaster of the weekend, or disaster at the start of the season, and give that to Aston Martin. I mean, today, perhaps it went slightly better than they thought, but they were still in and out the pits. It was essentially another test for them today. Some green shoots of recovery, but they're very small and perhaps not that green, in that the car managed to get out there, but still wasn't completing that many laps. They're down to their last 2 batteries. I think I heard Fernando Alonso suggest that the next replacement batteries aren't due until Bahrain. Now, if that's the case, then that's 2 race weekends to get through. For most of these teams, those batteries are meant to last half a season, so not an issue. And perhaps the Honda battery itself isn't a problem. It was the vibrations that were damaging it, and they seem to have got a little bit of a handle on that. Basically, come up with a countermeasure whereby they protect the battery from the vibrations, but it seems like the vibrations are still there to some extent, and the performance clearly isn't there, and the reliability isn't there. So, I think it's also worth a quick mention on Aston Martin. Well, let's move it forward to the next step in the season, and that's going to be the Chinese Grand Prix next weekend. I think you're flying out in about 3 days from Australia to China, Nate. But for the teams, there's no rest either, because it's not like going into another race weekend where they have 3 practice sessions to understand more about these cars. They're going to have 1 practice session because it's a sprint weekend. So what can we expect? What can they expect from their arrival in China?
I think utter chaos might be the word. And I don't mean that lightly. I think, the drivers that we got to ask today just said 1 practice session is not enough time with these cars to learn a new circuit, and one with very different characteristics to Albert Park. And then go into qualifying, and they can go into qualifying, but to not be maximized or anywhere close to it. Now, that isn't the worst thing from a competitive standpoint. I think you're going to get a very mixed up grid, especially in that first session, when the teams are really trying to work their cars out. And then that in turn, the promise of the sprint race was always mixed up grids, cars out of position and stuff like that. So that could be great. And then again, they qualify straight after the sprint race, and then they have to race on Sunday. So the promise of chaos, but again, you have to be wary when you talk about that, because everything I've just said there, as much as that does sound chaotic, it also is chaotic because of the flaws of the regulations. So we have to just see how this plays out. Is it entertaining because it's just wild, chaotic, and completely nonsense, or is it actually these cars are closer together every single race weekend? The drivers and the teams are getting a better handle on them, and there's just a bit of natural chaos from the regulations. That would be a good thing, but I think we're a long way away from working that out yet. But I know fans must hear this all the time, but China is actually going to be arguably more fascinating and more unpredictable than this race weekend because of that 1 practice session. So weirdly buzzed for it, even though I'm not convinced the regulations are in the best place. I think we could be in for an absolutely wild and wonderful or weird weekend, whichever word you want to delete there as appropriate. They could all be relevant. They might not all be either.
Well, we look forward to it. Safe travels to China, Nate. And anybody watching this, listening to this, can follow all of our reporting heading into the next race weekend on ESPN.com.